Hey everybody, it's Matt. Welcome back to the Journey Church podcast. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you can automatically get our weekly episodes. And you might want to go ahead and subscribe to our Journey YouTube channel as well. You'll find messages, music, interviews, inspiring stories, and more for you all right there. Now, I hope this episode helps you take your next step in following Jesus. When it comes to money, one of the things that we all have in common, and it actually doesn't matter if you consider yourself a Christian or not, this is true for all of us. One of the things that we all have in common is we all want to win with money. I've never met anybody who enjoyed financial pressure. So all of us want to win with money, and this is definitely true, we all want a little more money. Isn't that right? It is very rare to meet somebody who's like, yeah, they offered me a pay raise, and I told them, no, I've got plenty. You just give that to somebody else. I mean, who does that? We all want a little bit more money. And the thing is, there is nothing wrong with either one of these statements. There's nothing wrong with either one of these desires. I think they're both good. The problem is, we're not very good at them. We're not very good at them. And the reason I say that is because most Americans spend more than they make. So we're not very good with money. We're definitely not winning with money. If, I make $1, but I'm always spending $1.25 or $1.50. You don't have to be a mathematician to know that gets you in trouble eventually. That catches up to you pretty quick. Most Americans pay interest on things that decrease in value. This one always makes me scratch my head, and I'm not trying to shame anybody, but because it's common. Most everybody's done it. But we just don't stop and think about the fact that if I'm buying something for $100, but I'm having to borrow to buy it, well, I'm not paying $100 for it. I'm paying that plus however much the interest adds up to be. So I'm paying, 125, 150, whatever it is, And then we're paying interest, so we're paying more than what the actual sticker value is of the thing. But on the flip side, almost everything we buy like this, and houses exception, maybe a couple other things, but almost everything we buy like this, the minute we buy it, the value of that thing decreases dramatically. I don't care if you're talking about furniture or homes or a phone. I mean, it doesn't matter. Whatever, I don't have enough cash for it, so I'm going to borrow, which means I have to pay more for it than the sticker price. And the minute I walk out with it or drive off the lot with it or whatever, well, the value of it just plummets. And so here we are constantly increasing the gap we have between the value of what we have and what we're actually paying for it. That doesn't sound like winning with money. That sounds common. That's just what everybody seems to do and think that's the way to be. But that doesn't necessarily get you ahead. And as a result of that, most Americans feel financial pressure to provide and acquire more than they currently have. I bet you feel that pressure. And again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just a thing, isn't it? In our culture, we all tend to feel pressure to provide more than we currently have, to get more than we currently have. No matter where we are, this is the irony of it. It does not matter where you are financially. You still have this drive or this pressure in you. I think I need to do a little bit more. I think I need to make a little bit more. I think I need to have a little bit more. Now, the irony of this, and again, this is not to shame you. This is just for perspective. If we could somehow zoom out and see the entire world, the perspective of the world, then we would realize how funny this is as Americans, because we live in the wealthiest nation in the world. We've got more than most anybody else in the world. And 90%, and maybe that's not entirely accurate, but it's close. 90%, 80% of the world would love to swap places with us. So when we started talking to them about, I just don't feel like I have quite enough, and I got this going on, there's pressure here, and I got to make a little bit more, and I need to buy that, but I don't have money, so I'm going to borrow. When we started talking about our debt, when we started talking about all that stuff, they would just chuckle at us and say, you want to swap spots? Because, what they're living with, they're nowhere close to what we have. So they scratch their heads when they look at us Americans and go, financial pressure, do you not realize everything you have? But I know, that's a little naive of me to say we should view life that way, because we do live in America, and in our culture, we're a bit isolated, aren't we? We just see our world and not the entire world. And so because of that, we feel all this pressure, which is why this study just came out last month. 75% of Americans feel financial pressure right now. Well, of course we do. There's the inflation and the price of everything's gone up, and on and on and on. So of course, I'm not downplaying any of that. I understand why people feel financial pressure. But 75% of us, 3 out of 4 of us in this room, feel financial pressure. That has an impact, doesn't it? Not just on our finances. That has an impact on our mental health. That has an impact on our relationships, on and on it goes. And as I told you last week, 3 out of 5 Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. So 3 out of 5 of us in this room, if you're an average crowd, and you're not, you're better than that. But if you're an average crowd, 3 out of 5 of you would be going, okay, I'm just trying to go month to month, week to week to get by. And my question, and this is what I want to talk about for the next few minutes. My question is, why? Why do we feel such financial pressure? Why are we so stressed? And what's it doing to us? This is part 2, if you're just joining us, of a series we've been in called Money Monsters. We're talking about some skills to slay them. But the big idea of the series, if you're just catching up, the big idea of the series is being good with money is not just about knowing what to do with your money. Being good with money happens when you know what your money is doing to you. And money is doing something to all of us. Money has a pull. Money comes with some monsters. And I'm not saying money's bad, money's a great thing, but you just have to be aware of the fact that with that money comes some monsters that naturally pull us in a certain direction. Monsters that are going to try to take us deeper and deeper and deeper until we can't see the light of day. And these monsters cannot be avoided. You can't structure your life in such a way. It's like, oh no, I'm immune to all that. You're going to feel it. You have to figure out how to put the skills in place to slay the monsters that are inevitably going to come. Because these monsters are like a current. You think about the current of a river. You think about the current in an ocean. They're like that current. You cannot avoid it. The minute you get in the water, you feel the current. And if you're not intentional, you know this. If you're not intentional, that current is going to drag you in a very predictable destination. So when we go to the ocean or we're at a river or whatever, and my kids are getting in the water, you've had this experience, right? This happened to us recently. They're in the water and they're playing, and it takes about 5 minutes for me to have to whistle and be like, hey, back over here. They started in front of me. They're halfway down the beach. It's like, come back. Because they're not paying any attention. They don't even realize they've drifted. They're just like, no, we're having fun. But the natural current of the water is going to take them somewhere. Well, listen, if you are not aware of these money monsters, the natural current of your money is going to take you somewhere. You will have no clue you have drifted, and you will have no clue you've ended up in the place you've ended up, and your heart has ended up where it's ended up, and your relationships have ended up where they've ended up. You'll never see any of it. Especially, it's true of what we're going to talk about today. So last week, we talked about the first 2 money monsters, which are, if you're thinking about them, they're all connected. All 4 of them we're going to talk about. But these first 2 are on the surface. They're a little easier to spot. One is pride. One is a pursuit of more. Whenever you get money, money has a tendency to create some pride, some ego, some arrogance in us. Money also has a tendency to cause us to want more. I've never seen somebody, again, who got so much money, they're like, I don't ever want any more. I'm good. This week I had a chance to spend a couple hours with a guy who's worth $10 billion. You heard that right, with a B. Let me just clarify, he's not in Murray, in case you were wondering, okay? Not in Murray. But I had a chance to spend a couple hours with him. And you know what he spends his time doing? And this is not a bad thing. He spends his time figuring out how to turn his 10 billion into 20. That's what he thinks about. And you're like, oh, if I had 10 billion, I'd never. No, you wouldn't. I'm just telling you. All of us have this insatiable pursuit of more in us. That's just what money does to us. I'm not saying it's a terrible thing if you're intentional about it and you use it for good, and he's doing a great job of using it for good. But if we're not careful, we'll just always want more and more and more, and we'll never be content. We'll never be content. We'll always be unsatisfied with what we have. Today, we're going to talk about the third monster. This monster lives, it's connected to the first 2, but it lives below the first 2. It's a little deeper in the water. You can't see it. As a matter of fact, my biggest challenge today will be to convince any of you that you actually struggle with it. Because I've never met anybody who had the self-awareness to go, that's my problem. But I'm telling you, it is a problem for all of us. And it bleeds. This is why we're talking about it. It bleeds out, not just in our money decisions. It bleeds out in the relationships we have with all the people we love the most. It bleeds out into all the decisions we make that are not money related if we're not careful. So to introduce it to you, I want to take you all the way back to Jesus. So one day he's teaching a large crowd of people. Luke tells us there are thousands and thousands of people there that day. And he's teaching them, and in the course of his teaching, in this crowd of thousands, there are 2 brothers there who happen to spot each other. Now here's the thing about these brothers. They're in a fight. My guess is they've not been talking because their dad has died, and they're in an argument over the inheritance. I'm sure you've never seen this happen with a family. They're in a fight over the inheritance that they're trying to get from the dad. And one brother thinks he's not getting his fair shake. One brother thinks the other brother is cheating him out of some money. And so when these two guys spot each other as Jesus is talking, the brother who thinks he's getting the short end of the stick decides, this is my opportunity. Here's Jesus. Clearly he's popular. Everybody's listening to him. I'm going to get Jesus to side with me against my other brother, and then he'll have to do what I'm asking him to do. The peer pressure will be too much. And so a really awkward situation unfolds. The brother kind of works his way through the crowd to get to the front, and he interrupts Jesus right in the middle of his teaching. He says, I got a family problem I need you to solve. Now imagine this happening. I mean, you got thousands of people. It takes a lot of courage to do this. Clearly, this guy believes he is such in the right that Jesus is going to side with him. Otherwise, you don't take a chance on embarrassing, humiliating yourself with this. So even for all these people, he thinks, I'm going to embarrass and humiliate my brother. This is going to be incredible. So he tells Jesus the whole thing's happening. He says, all right, Jesus, what are you going to tell my brother to do? And Jesus does what Jesus often does, which is not directly answer the question. Instead, he turns back to the crowd. This had to get uncomfortable. He turns back to the crowd. And he says, hey, these two brothers have given me an opportunity to teach y'all something really important. They became an object lesson. Just, for your own sake, you never want to be a Jesus object lesson, all right? That usually doesn't end well. So he says, I'm going to teach you something based on what y'all just heard. And here's what he says to them. He says, watch out. Be on your guard against. Now, how would you expect him to finish this? The brother is expecting him to say, be on your guard against unfairness. Like this brother over here is showing to this brother, Be on your guard against family conflict. Don't let money rip your family apart. Jesus doesn't say any of that. He comes from left field. He says, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. There's our money monster. He says, there's something under the surface here that nobody's wanting to acknowledge, but all this conflict you've got, all this fighting, all these problems, they're just because of greed, to which I'm sure this one brother's like, greed, this isn't a greed problem, this is a fairness problem. Jesus says, no, this is actually a greed problem. So just to get us all on the same page, let me give you a definition of greed. Greed is the assumption that everything placed in my hands is for my consumption. To simplify that, greed is the assumption whenever I get something, it must be all for me. That's greed. To which you would argue, that's not greedy, that's just normal. That's not greedy. Everybody thinks that way. That's not greedy. I mean, I earned it. I deserve it. I should get it. Jesus goes, wait a minute. No. Whenever you assume everything put in your hands is for your consumption, you're being greedy. Whenever you assume it's all for your consumption, you're living with closed fists. When you think it's all for you, then it's going to create problems in you and problems around you. Let me see if I can explain this. There's a little greed lurking deep in your heart when you find yourself valuing your possessions more than you value people. To which I think, I never do that. Well, have you ever hurt somebody's feelings because they did something to one of your possessions that you didn't want them to do? Have you ever hurt somebody's feelings because they scratched that, they broke that, they messed with that, they borrowed that and didn't, whatever? You ever gotten mad at somebody over that? Have you ever prioritized your work over your family because you just wanted to have more? You wanted to get more. You wanted to earn more. This might explain why some of us live paycheck to paycheck and we have no margin. It's not the only reason, but it could be a reason. It might explain why some of us are in so much debt. Because we assume everything placed in our hands is for us, and we assume we deserve every single thing that we get. I was talking to a buddy of mine this morning, actually, and he was reminding me of a book that I'd read. He's reading it right now. The book's called Thinking Fast and Slow. And in this book, they decided to do some experiments to see if you preload people mentally to focus on money. So in other words, without these people knowing, they tried to put them in a greedy mindset. All right, that's what they did. We're gonna subliminally talk about some stuff, put them in an environment where they're focused on money. And then they wanted to see, once these people have been preloaded to be greedy, to be focused on their money too much, how they would treat the people around them. And what they discovered was this. This wasn't like a Christian thing. This was just a study. What they discovered was that people who struggle with greed, the greed doesn't stay confined to their financial decisions. That the greed actually impacts the way they treat the people around them. That people who are greedy financially, people who assume everything's for them, people who hold things with closed fists, people who say, I deserve it all, and more. People like that interact with the people around them differently. They're not as helpful. They're not as kind. They're not willing to give a little bit of their time to serve them. They just have a totally different way that they approach people. Because again, you can't keep this contained to your bank account. What money does is it pulls us in a direction that impacts our entire life. And that's why Jesus, I think, said, you got to watch out. You got to be on your guard against all kinds of greed. And we're going to talk about this more, but there's a whole lot of different kinds of greed. It shows up in a lot of different ways. It's got all kinds of faces, shows up in all kinds of places. So these two brothers, they're arguing, and they think it's a fairness issue, and it's a dad would have wanted issue, and they got all these reasons going on. And Jesus says, no. Actually, at the heart of this, the thing that's ripping your family apart is your greed. It's the assumption that everything should be for you and for your consumption. And then Jesus does something that's really helpful. He says the reason we tend to think this way is because we have a wrong perspective on life. And he unpacks this. Here's what he says next. He says life, let me just remind you, life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. In other words, life doesn't equal your stuff. Now, we already know this, right? As a matter of fact, I'm gonna try something. This could really backfire on me, but it's first service, so I'll know not to do it next time, right? So I thought I'd experiment with you guys. I want you all to pull your phones out right now, okay? Everybody grab your phone, pull it out. This is where it's going to backfire. Do not be distracted by all the messages that you just saw when you pulled out your phone, because I've got some right there. Here's what I want you to look at. I want you to look at the wallpaper on your phone, okay? Whether it's a lock screen, whether it's a home screen, I want you to look at the wallpaper on your phone. Now, here's my guess, and we're about to find out if this is true. My guess is the vast majority of you have the pictures of people you love as the wallpaper on your phone. How many of you have a picture of somebody you love as the wallpaper on your phone? Let me see. Hold on up high. Okay, thank you. I knew I had faith in you for a reason. All right, good. Because if you'd have said, no, it's the next car I want, it would have blown the whole thing, okay? So, good job. Good job. I'm proud of you. Yeah. I bet nobody in here has a wallpaper that says, don't forget, life equals my stuff. None of you got that, do you? Because you know intellectually that's not true. But just think about this. You know this intellectually. But practically, how many of us live as if life equals our stuff? Can you explain another reason why we spend more than we make? Why we have the debt that we have? Why we cheat our family because we work so many extra hours? Can you explain why we're so obsessed with the next thing and the next thing and the next thing? Think about how much time, mental energy you give to thinking about how to make the next dollar or buy the next thing or get to the next place. Practically, we live like life equals our stuff. And Jesus is going, that perspective takes you straight to greed. You have to believe life does not consist in the abundance of your possessions. You say, yeah, Matt, but the only reason I am where I am financially is because I love the people in my life so much. I just want them to have a better life than me, and I want to give them everything I want. I know you love the people in your life. But the way you demonstrate that love is not to go into debt. The way you demonstrate that love is not to, not be around them to work to give them something, because they don't want something, they want you. That's how you actually demonstrate love. All you're teaching somebody when you get so obsessed with giving them more, all you're teaching them is, don't listen to what I say, watch what I do. Life actually equals stuff, and the only way you can be happy is if you have more. We all fall into this trap, and Jesus knew it. So here's what Jesus did. After he explains this to the whole crowd, and now this one brother, you can imagine, I'm sure he's red-faced and like, uh-oh, this is not going the way I thought. Then Jesus launches into a parable. If you're not familiar with a parable, it's just a made-up story. It's a fictional story. Jesus would tell these all the time, and he would always tell them to make a point, to teach a principle. And so he launches into this parable to try to drive this idea home. Here's what he says. He says, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest, which sounds like the average middle-class American. Now, I know none of us feel like, we've got abundance right now, and there's all this financial, I get all of that. But the point is, none of us have to work 7 days a week. That's abundance compared to most of the world. None of us, are wondering where our next meal's coming from. I mean, if we step back in spite of all the pressure and all the financial problems, we go, yeah, I do live a pretty abundant life. I'm good. So Jesus is describing a guy that could be any of us. Any of us. And this guy has a problem. He's actually got more than he expected. It's a good problem to have. He's got more than he expected. So Jesus says, again, made up story, right? So Jesus says, the guy thinks to himself, what shall I do? I got no place to store my crops. What am I going to do? I didn't have a plan for this. More came in than I thought was going to come in. What am I going to do? So, quick question for you. What are you going to do? What do you do when you get more than you thought you were going to get? What do you do when you get the pay raise? What do you do when, I don't know, someone in your family dies and you get an inheritance you didn't know was coming? What do you do when you get a bonus you didn't expect to be getting? What do you do anytime a little extra money comes in that you didn't know was coming in? What do you think? What do you do first? I bet it's something similar to the guy in Jesus' story. He says this, the guy decides, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns, I'll build bigger ones, and there I'll store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you've got plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Translate that into 2023. He said, I need to rent a storage unit. Maybe 2 or 3 of them. I can't park my car in my garage. It's full of stuff. I got to get some storage units too. Okay, it's what he did. And quite honestly, listen, most of us, if you're a business person, you get this. Most of us look at what this guy is thinking he's going to do and we go, that is so smart. It's so smart. I mean, this is awesome. Not only is it's brilliant because he's like, okay, if I just take good care of this, if I save this, he's not going to blow it. I'm just going to save it. Feels pretty responsible to me. I'm going to save it. And while I'm saving it, I'm going to tear down the barns I've got. I'm going to build bigger barns, which gives me a tax write-off on top of that. This is wonderful. Okay? If this guy had come and asked me for advice, this might have been the advice I gave the guy. It just makes perfect sense. The problem is, he hadn't been able to zoom away and look at the big picture. The problem is he had forgotten that everything placed in his hands was not for his consumption alone. And so Jesus, now remember, he's making up this story. So he could have had the guy do anything you want him to do, and he could have had this story end any way you want him to end. And honestly, in America, most of us read this story and we think what's going to come next is, and Jesus says, way to be responsible, and the guy lived happily ever after and enjoyed an early retirement. This is kind of the goal, isn't it? But Jesus doesn't take the story that way. Jesus says this next. He says, but God said to this guy who had more than he needed. Well, wait a minute. We kind of forgotten about God. Felt pretty self-sufficient here, didn't we? Nobody's mentioned God in the story. Nobody's thought about, I got all this extra the rich guy's saying, and God didn't cross my mind. Jesus says, yeah, it's actually a problem. But God said to him, you fool. I thought this was a wise, responsible choice. Jesus is going, nope, not actually in the big grand scheme of things. You fool. This very night, your life's going to be demanded from you. In other words, you're planning for years down the road, but you're actually dying tonight. Now, made up story, remember? But in this made up story, this guy's going to die. And then God asks the guy a question. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Now, every one of you knows the answer to that. Somebody else. That's the answer. You know the answer to that because you're hoping, you're not hoping, but you've thought about one day, if your parents or grandparents have something, one day you're going to get what they've got. So it's like, you're not hoping they die, but you just kind of know what's going to happen, So we all know the answer to this. Somebody else. Jesus says, yeah, so, it was nice planning. It was just too short-sighted. And then Jesus makes his point. He says, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, with whoever lives greedy. but is not rich toward God. What in the world do you mean by rich toward God? Well, here's what Jesus meant. Jesus was not mad that the guy was thinking about the future. He was trying to help us understand this made-up guy wasn't thinking far enough into the future. That the guy was just thinking about himself. The guy was assuming everything was for his consumption. That the guy had lost sight of the fact that everything that had been placed in his hands, this abundance he had, it had come from God. And God had put it in his hands for a reason, but this guy wasn't using it for the reason God had put in his hands. But if he would have, if he'd chosen to, he could have been rich towards God, which was Jesus' way of saying, God put it in your hands, not just to make an impact for you, but to make an impact on the lives of the people around you. God put it in your hands to invest. Investing's awesome, but not just to invest in the stock market, in an index fund, in a target retirement fund. No. He put it in your hands so you'd invest some of it in his kingdom. And that investment pays dividends not just in this life, it pays dividends for all of eternity. So you get to the other side and you find out, oh my gosh, I'm way richer in eternity than I ever thought I would be because of what I did here with what God gave me. This is what we talked about last week. That if we have the mindset of I'm an owner, this is all mine, I'm going to close my fist and I will be greedy. If you have an owner mindset, and if you're not a Christian, this is the only mindset you should have, I think. But if you have an owner mindset, you're going to assume it's all for you. But if you actually believe you're a manager, that you're going to be accountable for everything God puts in your hand, we got to approach it differently. Now you've got to follow what the owner of the money says to do with the money, which is no. We're not going to start by spending everything on you. We're going to give first. I'm putting this in your hands so you can use some of this to help somebody else before you help yourself. And then I want you to save a little bit, because if you save a little bit, then you don't have to work 7 days a week, which means you got time to serve somebody else, not just yourself. And then with what's left, I want you to spend it. I want you to enjoy it. But you got to get the order right. It's not me. It's you, me. Why would Jesus teach that? I'll tell you, because generosity is the only antidote to greed. It's the only antidote. Nothing else will slay it. If you want to be free of this assumption that everything is for your consumption, you have to force yourself to do something that is unnatural. You have to force yourself to give first, to be generous, when everything in you wants to take care of you first and be generous last. It's the only way you get it out of your heart. And if you hear me saying that, or you've ever been in a moment where you thought about being generous and it just made you so tense, it made you so uncomfortable, you found yourself resisting it, arguing it, I'm not living that way, I can't live that way. That is a sign. There you go. You actually just shined a spotlight on your greed. That thing's coming up from the depths. It's poking its head out of the surface so you can see it. So, here's all I want to invite you to do this week. You're going to get something this week in all probability. A paycheck, you're going to have some money, you're going to get a thing, I don't know. Over the next week or 2 weeks, you're going to have some things placed in your hand. And if you want to let greed keep dragging you down this direction, then go ahead. But if you want a different life with different relationships and a different level of contentment and satisfaction, then whenever that thing is placed in your hand, I just want you to ask a question. I'm not telling you what to do with it. I just want you to ask a question. Say, God, what do you want me to do with it? I just got this paycheck. What do you want me to do with it? I just got this thing. What do you want me to do with it? This is the question managers ask. Owners never think about this question. Greedy people never ask this question. But this question will cause you to reframe how you think about what you have. This question will help you remember life does not consist in the abundance of your possessions. This question will lead you to acknowledge, it's yours, God, so I'll do whatever you want me to do with it. And then whatever he says, Do it. Whatever you think he wants you to do, go do it. But you will find the generosity he leads you towards will begin to slay the greed in you. And you will be happier, more at peace, with better relationships because of it. And the irony is, you'll be better financially because of it, because you will develop the discipline to win with money. And when you show God that you're good with this amount, he just might trust you enough to give you more. Let me pray for us. Father, it's so hard for us to spot this in us, but I know so often when something's placed in my hands, my first thought is, what's the next thing I can use this on, the thing I can do more of, the thing I can upgrade? Would you help us this week just to be aware, to have enough courage to ask the question, because it's scary to ask the question, God, what do you want me to do with this? And then the courage to do whatever you say. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Hey, if you'd like more content like this, subscribe to our YouTube channel and download our Journey app to access all of our recent message content. And our app is the easiest way to share this content with a friend. For more information on our church or to find our app or our YouTube channel, just visit journeycalway.com. That's journeycalway.com. Thanks for listening.